I'm Carolyn Holzman, and this is Confessions of an SEO. You'll find Confessions is a short-form chat about SEO and surrounding topics. I share my personal, and professional view based on over 17 years as a frontline SEO tester, and forensic SEO. My goal, I think the way I'm seeing it right now, is to be to someone what I would have liked when I was beginning SEO and trying to understand sometimes, what was going on, when Google does Google. Ahrefs is the sponsor of this episode. Welcome and hello. I'd like to say this is Season 5, Episode 37 of Confessions. Last week, I shared my thoughts on what caught my eye about the judgment on Google's antitrust lawsuit that had been brought by the DOJ. And if you would like to listen to that, I'll put the URL in the description. But also to let you know, confessionsofanseo.com is where you can always find the most recent episode. If you haven't already, subscribe to Confessions and know that by doing that simple act on your favorite podcast platform, that's a great way to support this podcast and helping others find it. Thank you to Ahrefs, the sponsor of this episode. On October 14th and 15th at Intercontinental San Diego, Ahrefs is hosting their flagship SEO and marketing conference called Evolve. Ahrefs Evolve is a 2-day event packed with actionable sessions, smart strategies, real conversations, and an after party. It's where digital marketers come together to learn what's working now, swap insights, and connect with others who are shaping the future of marketing. For conference speaker lineup, schedule, and to get your tickets, go to ahrefsevolve.com. There's going to be a link in the description. Last Wednesday marked 4 years since the beginning of my indexation research project. I call it Crawl or No Crawl. It was really amazing to think that I had been doing this for 4 years. Not going to lie, not every day is sunshine and lollipops. As if the SEO life isn't full of enough monotonous, repetitive tasks. Imagine running the same test every day, but not just one test, not even 2 tests, but now 3 tests every day. And it breaks down into new content for natural discovery indexation, just letting Google find it, new content via Search Console request, and revised already indexed and served content via Search Console request. So unless you also have a fair amount of discipline and a high degree of the need to know, I do not think this is for everyone. So why do this? I've had many people in my family ask me that. So if those in our industry understood when to apply pressure and when to know that Google was busy doing something other than worrying about our content getting indexed and served, knowing which phase was in play, that could be valuable to our industry. Now, Crawl or No Crawl has evolved into a paid supporting membership. It's $18 a month, and reports go out most every day to confirm if the data verified, if Google is processing both the first and second passes through the indexation system on those 3 various types of content. Now, there's been a lot of fruit that has fallen off this indexation tree, and I figured celebrating its birthday would be a great time to sort of break that down and remind myself. Sometimes I need that little shot in the arm to keep going. So while it was under our noses all the time, until I started doing this, I don't think we were sort of front of the brain aware that every day, on average, sometimes it's 4, Google updates our index page reports for our sites in Search Console. But why is that type of knowledge valuable? How is it useful? Well, right before each of those updates, there's a phase where I've seen Google kind of shut off access into the data. Like it's like they had to pick a time that they were going to stop what they would normally do, and then get that data that they the date they stopped it on back to the last time they stopped it, and go through that updating process. And then right after the update, they would then push out, it appeared to be almost like a sort of like a dump, right? All this processed content in that period of time where they kind of were holding things back in order to update their report. When it would push through, it would create a spike in the volatility across the SEO weather tools. Now, you've seen this. Volatility goes straight up, and everybody, because it's like volatility, high volatility is like, oh no, there's an update. And low volatility is like, oh, Google's working. It's actually the opposite. But when people see volatility go up, they start announcing that this must be an unannounced update. And most of the time, according to the data, it was not, and it is not. And I learned that wasn't the only time that particular pattern showed up. Now, Google owns Chrome so much that it's hard to know where Google ends and Chrome begins. You can listen to last week's episode if you want to know more what I think about that. So as Chrome, which is a software, has versions, just like every software in the world, Google will make tweaks. And something now does something better than it did before. So the version number changes. Mobile Googlebots have a Chrome build. Desktop Googlebots have a Chrome build. Special crawlers like Google Other eventually acquired a Chrome build. And as Chrome builds get deployed into the crawling system, Google tests them. They test them live in the SERPs. But it doesn't change all of the Chrome builds of all of their crawlers at the same time. And when they begin this process, what it looks like often on this side of the browser is people could have pages that were findable, but then poof, they can't find them. And then suddenly, and very often without doing anything at all, these pages come back. And people are like, I didn't do anything. It went away. I didn't do anything, and it came back. And people who panicked and made changes to those pages during that test phase, they may have kind of recalculated their page, but maybe they didn't come back. And you see, that's the value of this information. Sometimes the best course of action in this particular case is to do nothing, which is awfully hard for an SEO to do. We often live and die by ranking shifts. And we've been so conditioned to think, and I'm going to say assume, that Google is stable and working with the same intent 100% of the time. And the data reveals that is just not so. Like I said before, if they're going to be pushing out data, they have to kind of stop. It's like that door is going to reverse direction. And it's not that Google doesn't make mistakes. They do. But when a tracker tells an SEO that some page has disappeared, as SEOs, we will automatically assume the problem is us, or rather our optimizations of that particular piece of content. Now, in addition to Search Console behavior, in the beginning, I wasn't tracking server logs as a data overlay on my tests. But I changed that. And once I started to add that in the mix, that combination opened up my eyes to things that could be seen from the server logs. And I would compare this to Search Console details. And Google does a lot of weird one-off things. Just this past summer, I discovered that Google was intermittently crawling or testing an unannounced crawler agent, a Naver bot. Now, that's a South Korean search engine. This thing was coming from Google IPs. I'm not saying it was a Korean bot. I'm saying Google started crawling and it specifically, it seemed to be around apps. Now, there's an episode on that. It's called Never What It Seems, Google's latest crawler. When I was first looking at server logs, the Chrome builds initially were static, so I really didn't pay much attention to them at first. And starting around the end of April 2022, I started to track specific Chrome builds because I noticed they were getting updated. And like I said, not all crawlers were updated at the same time. There was a pattern to this update process. So the first one to update is always the mobile Googlebot. And after that one, it's the inspection tool crawlers. After they came in, the next one is the non-rendering mobile inspection tool that goes next to that new build. And the very last ones to get synced up to the same Chrome build are the rendering inspection tool crawlers. And just if you don't know, those are the crawlers that come when you make requests through Search Console. So it's a different set of bots that comes when you request through the Search Console for indexation. Now, everything I just said, some of that has shown that it might be changing in this last week, but it could also have been someone made a mistake and then they fixed it. Don't know, but it was observed. Now, when it comes to the mobile first indexing, crawl or no crawl has data prior to the big shift, which was October 31st, 2023. And then there's data after. And before that shift, we had two types of Search Console data. There were sites whose data was what they called primary mobile or smartphone, and there were others that were designated as primary desktop. There was no rhyme or reason. It wasn't like old sites were always desktop and new sites were primary mobile. It would seem to be somewhat random. Now, prior to the shift, I noted when mobile data sites were easier to get content indexed than their desktop data site counterparts. And I was using the same type of content. And consequently, for the primary desktop sites designation in Search Console, it looked like very different behavior in terms of what was happening on those sites. Now, after mobile first indexing, there came a point in which certain content could no longer make the full path through and get content served from the same domain. Now, this was the case when each page on a domain was basically a different topic. I was creating fresh content for every test. And I was on the same domain, and maybe one day it might be about, I don't know, purple sweet potatoes. And then the next day it might be on how to adjust the pressure on a, what do they call it, pressure washer. Okay? Now, previous to that, I had no problem getting all that content indexed. And then suddenly there came a point where on the same domain it was not happening. And I've retroactively realized it was the appearance of the helpful content classifier clue, because there it was behaving like it was topical focus behavior on a domain level. Now, if you want to see my work on that, I'm not going to bore you to death here, but there's a paid analysis published, and all you have to do is Google my name, Carolyn Holzman, Helpful Content System. You'll find it. It was from this early data where my initial start began in my formulating what the helpful content system was measuring. And from there realized that it also did not seem to account for the canonical of a page that used the anchor text URLs, like the kind that you see in table of contents. Now, taking a step back, I don't think people realize the shift and the shrinking footprint that there is now for ways to get into Google's indexation system, the machine of this process. And I'm going to talk about the indexing API because for a long time, the indexing API was permitted to use for indexing, even though the documentation said it could not be used for sites other than for live events and jobs. Now, in my early days of testing the API within Crawl or No Crawl, even seasoned SEO testers told me not to even bother to try and test it, that they had tried it previously and there was nothing there. End of story. But a tester doesn't just quit just because someone else says it doesn't work for them. But even if it hadn't worked, that type of test is still valuable to know it's not working. And as it turned out, the API was really the only way by early 2022 to achieve indexation. Search Console at that time was where content went to die, unless I guess it took about a year later before that changed. But I think somewhere within, the Google system, it became more operating procedure to look the other way when we were all using it because Google was having trouble with indexation in general. That's why I started this project in 2021. It was started to determine, is Google running the first and second pass? By 2024, fast forward, everybody and their brother had an indexer that used the Google Indexing API. And then last fall, that system went dark. At least that's what Google said. But what they say, you should trust whatever they say, but verify. So I ran that data to verify if indeed the indexing API was no longer working as it had been. Now here's how I tested it. I'd publish a new page, submit it through Search Console. Not through Search Console, through the indexing API. And I would receive a status code that said it worked. Then I would log into the Cloud Service Account dashboard for the Gmail, which had acquired, the indexing API keys for that site where that page was published. So they were definitely connecting to that site. And I looked at the event data and saw that the system had acknowledged the request of that new page via the API. Now that's as far as most paid tools could go because that's all they had to confirm whether it was a successful submission or not. But as far as they could see the system work, but that was not the case. Because logic would dictate that within those server logs, if the indexing API was working, you look in those server logs, you would see the page getting published and then see the Googlebot. Now, at least up until December 5th, 2022, you would see the first HTML pull of the page, then a robots text file pull to confirm that it was permitted to go into the index, and then you'd see a series of rendering crawls. After December 5th, the behavior became only a strict HTML crawl by Googlebot. So in this particular case, I could see the page being published, but there was no HTML pull from a Googlebot. No Googlebot at all on any during that time frame where that request came through. Now, normally bot appearance had been instantaneous to pinging the API. So instead of killing the connection, what if Google had just slowed it down? So I would wait on that particular test. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, a whole month. And there was no spontaneous crawl of that page from that API trigger. And I was testing other pages, and each set of server logs continued to also show an absence of the Googlebot for those tests. Now, tools remain on the market saying they could get the system to crawl instantaneous. And at this point, I understand why they did that, because they couldn't see that the bots were not going to the sites, even if the system confirmed the request. Now, these 4 years have provided me with quite the education that, frankly, we don't get just because we're in SEO. You only get it when you start doing the boring stuff. When you test and you pull logs and you confirm Search Console. And all of that is kind of what Crawl or No Crawl is designed to do. So you might say, my indexation fluency is high. But the real jewel of this work, I think, for me, is the indexing platform that came out of this data, Indexilla. Yeah, it's a shameful plug, or I should say shameless plug. So, the question really is, well, was it worth it? And I would say, yes, it was. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that went into Indexzilla's process. And, just because it's out and working and available does not mean that testing has stopped. There's a few more places on the drawing board to add into the system. And just to give you an idea, for example, I want people to be able to automate submission of their sitemaps, because this is also another thing I've learned from this process, that this action of submitting your sites, over a period of time, I've learned that this is hugely important in what is now a sluggish, not that thrilled to be crawling indexation system that Google has. So happy birthday, Crawl or No Crawl Research Project. And here's to a healthy year 5 of collecting data every day and sharing it. Well, that's it for me this week. Thank you for being a listener. Thank you to Ahrefs for being the sponsor of this episode. Check out Ahrefs Evolve SEO and Marketing Conference at ahrefsevolve.com. If you have questions about today's topic, you can reach out and text your question to 512-222-3132. Indexzilla is designed to get your pages discovered. You can find it at indexzilla.io. Become a member of my indexation group, Crawl or No Crawl, for only $18 a month, receiving status reports to answer the question, is it me or is indexing off today? Thank you for listening, and until next week, I'll see you in the SERPs.